Welcome to this explainer. Close your eyes for just a second and imagine a tense, howling winter wind roaring across a frozen, completely barren landscape. Right now, there's probably a little plastic thermostat in your house, quietly keeping you alive. But for 300,000 years, our ancestors fought a winter so violent it could literally stop your heartbeat before the sun even came up. They didn't have modern insulation. They had raw, stubborn intelligence. And you know what? They didn't just survive it, they conquered it so thoroughly that modern Arctic engineers are actually still copying their designs today.
So, it really begs the question, would you survive the Ice Age without a heater? The cold back then wasn't just, bad weather. It was an active, relentless predator. If you dropped a modern person into that world, even wearing a really good winter coat, they wouldn't see the next morning, not because of a wild animal, but just from the quiet, lethal math of losing body heat.
Look at this absolutely staggering number, minus 40 degrees Celsius. Picture the Eurasian steppe, 25,000 years ago. At minus 40, exposed skin starts dying in under 10 minutes. Your eyelashes freeze together. Taking a breath feels exactly like swallowing shattered glass. This was a world that treated humans as a temporary inconvenience.
Okay, Section 1. The caveman myth. Officially busted. Since childhood, we've basically been sold this myth, right? Grunting figures huddled in a tiny, smoky cave. But the reality? It's so much more fascinating. Most Ice Age humans didn't live in caves at all. Think about it. Caves are actually pretty rare. They flood all the time, and they were usually already occupied by dangerous cave bears. Instead, archaeologists keep uncovering these deliberate, custom-built shelters out on flat, open ground. Our ancestors were brilliant engineers building their own warm worlds from scratch.
Section 2. Earth and layered walls.
Notice this depth here, 6 to 8 feet. Archaeologists found circular pits dug exactly to this depth, and there's a brilliant reason why. These early engineers had essentially discovered a law of physics. The ground is a giant, slow battery for heat. Up top, the air is minus 40, but 6 to 8 feet down into the earth, the temperature stays steady. They dug these geothermal pits by hand just to lock in that free warmth. And above ground, they built walls with highly specific layers. First, an inner layer of hide trapped the warm air. Then, a middle layer of dried grass and moss acted as bulk insulation. Finally, an outer layer of woven reed mats broke the lethal wind while somehow staying breathable. It's wild to think about, but this is the exact same weather-resistant house wrap and vapor barrier system that modern builders use today.
Moving on to Section 3. The mammoth-bone houses.
The craziest part of all this is that they built actual houses out of woolly mammoth skeletons, and these were structural masterpieces. They used 200-pound mammoth skulls as foundation anchors. They took long, curved tusks to build arching dome frameworks, and they stacked jawbones and interlocking herringbone patterns around the base to distribute the weight. They completely understood the mechanics of load-bearing architecture.
Just take a second to let this number sink in. 100. It took the bones of roughly 100 woolly mammoths just to build a single home. That represents weeks of absolutely brutal labor. Which means they had to plan and build this during the summer, betting their very lives on a winter forecast months in advance.
So, how well did these bone tents actually work? Well, when scientists tested full-scale reconstructions, the results were incredibly humbling. Using only modest fires, these homes stayed 40 to 50 degrees warmer than the lethal air outside. What's truly staggering is that modern Arctic research shelters frequently don't perform any better than that.
Section 4. Solving the invisible threat. The biggest enemy wasn't actually just the cold. The silent killer was moisture. Every single breath you take, every pot of melting snow, releases water vapor. At minus 40, that vapor hits the cold walls and freezes solid. Night after night, the ice builds up silently, adding this crushing weight, threatening to collapse the entire roof onto a sleeping family with zero warning.
To fight this, they engineered a passive ventilation machine. Step 1, they left small gaps near the ground to draw in dense, cold, dry air. Step 2, as the air inside warmed up, it naturally rose. Step 3, high vents placed right near the peak push that wet air out. Fresh air in, wet air out. And yes, this is the exact same condensation management principle written into our modern building codes. Section 5. Engineered fuel and clothing.
Because there were no forests around, they had to run a highly engineered fuel program. Step 1, they used precious wood kindling just to start the fire. Step 2, they added cracked raw bones to expose the fatty marrow, which actually burns way hotter than wood. Step 3, they stockpiled dried mammoth dung for a steady, slow burn. They were managing an incredibly strict energy budget.
And when they had to go outside, they didn't just drape random pelts over themselves, they used fine bone needles to craft real, tailored clothing. We're talking a true, technical layering system here. A soft base layer of fur trapped warm air against the skin, while an outer shell of tough hide shed the wind and moisture. If you check the tag on any high-end modern expedition jacket, you'll see they invented that exact three-layer system 25,000 years ago.
Section 6. The birth of culture. Historically, humans actually had a two-phase sleep rhythm, which left this wakeful window right in the middle of the night. Data shows that during the day, 80% of conversation was practical, logistics, survival. But at night, huddled around the fire, it completely flipped. 80% of all talk became myths, stories, and meaning. Daylight was for surviving, firelight was for meaning.
It was inside this exact firelight window that humanity's entire inner world was born. And we have the physical receipts to prove it. Those famous carved Venus figurines, they're found right by the hearts of these winter shelters. Breathtaking cave art and painted herds were a direct response to these long months of confinement. That campfire was literally the first theater, the first classroom, and the first church all rolled into one.
The absolutely crucial realization here is this. The cold didn't just fail to extinguish human culture. The cold is the furnace in which human culture was forged. Beauty, meaning, storytelling, these weren't just luxuries. They were essential survival tools. They were how our ancestors mentally survived that incredibly long, terrifying dark.
It creates this beautiful, almost painful loop in human history. During the Ice Age, this brilliant survival tech was perfected. But as soon as the climate warmed up and the forests returned, all that hard-won knowledge was simply willingly forgotten. Thousands of years later, in the modern era, we spent a century reinventing the exact same solutions using foam and electricity, only to realize they'd beaten us to the punch by 20,000 years.
Which brings us right back to that thermostat on your wall. That little plastic box that gives you so much comfort. Your ancient ancestors would have thought it was pure magic. But it's not magic. Every single warm night they ever had, they paid for in advance with brutal summer labor, stored fuel, constant structural repairs, and just an absolute refusal to die.
You didn't invent comfort, you inherited it from the most relentless engineers who ever lived. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Tonight, when your heater quietly clicks on, what do you owe the ancestors who refused to die? Remember what that warmth once cost, and understand just how truly extraordinary it is to simply be warm. Thanks so much for joining me in this explainer